here tonight, I'm going to begin by acknowledging that we're on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and I commit myself to working to a successful referendum to have a voice enshrined in our Constitution later this year. That's something that many of you here in this room will be working with me on. It is such a pleasure to have Chris Bowen joining us here in Jagga Jagga tonight. I think the turnout that we can see in this room on a Wednesday night, it's not cold, miraculously, everyone is enjoying our unseasonable weather, but the turnout on a night when I know you all have busy lives and a lot on, just goes to show what I already know, which is that climate change is a really important issue for people in Jagga Jagga. It's an issue you all care about, it's an issue you think about a lot, it's an issue you talk to me about a lot, and for all of those reasons, it is an issue that I take with me to Canberra and talk to Chris a lot about. And I know for me, in my second term of Parliament now, the difference between last term when I went to Parliament and just on climate change was faced with absolute denial, with absolutely nothing happening, within so many areas where there was so much potential for our country, we were in fact going backwards. The difference to now go to Parliament and see us passing legislation that does enshrine climate targets, it does put in place a safeguard mechanism to help us reach those targets, it is palpable. Chris has been driving so much of that work, and I know he will talk to you about that. But from my perspective, I really wanted Chris here to be able to explain to you what's happening, to hear from you about what you also want to see, because I know there is more still to be done, and to have that conversation. So we will structure this in the way that we'll hear from Chris next about some of the work that is ongoing, and then we'll move to questions and answers. My office will have two people with microphones at either side of the room, so if you have a question to ask, I'd ask that you come and line up to ask your question. If you do have mobility issues and that's not a possibility for you, please put your hand up and we'll get a microphone to you, but we'll do our best to get through as many questions as possible. As ever, if you can keep your phones on silent, and most of you are probably aware, but toilets are out through the foyer there. So that's the housekeeping. On to the main show. As I said, it's my great pleasure to welcome Chris Bowen, the Minister, here today. Chris is an absolute powerhouse in the Parliament, and he is, I think, one of the strongest policy makers we have in our government, and he is someone who gets the transformation that has to come in our economy to make this country a clean energy superpower. So, Chris, thank you for coming to Jagga. It's a pleasure to have you here, and over to you.
Well, thank you, Kate, and thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you, and of course I begin by celebrating the elders of the Wurundjeri people as well, and pay my respects to them and to all Indigenous people present. And as Kate noted, later this year we have the opportunity for the most important act of reconciliation our country has ever undertaken. And New Zealand recognised their First Peoples in 1867. Canada recognised in their constitution their First Peoples in 1982. The Indigenous people of Australia have invited us to recognise them this year, and I believe that's an opportunity our country will take. And thank you for your leadership. Thank you to everyone who's going to work with us and with our First Nations people to try and make it a reality. And look, it was a pleasure to, of course, accept Kate's invitation to be with you tonight. Kate is herself a powerhouse in the Parliament, a great collaborator and leader on climate issues, regularly, in a good way, banging down my door, sending me WhatsApp messages and Signal messages, and calling me about important matters, and I very much welcome her collaboration. You have a really, really great empathy in Kate's ways. Well, to get us going tonight, I thought I might just run through really what drives the highlights of our agenda over the last 11 months and some of the things we're going to be tackling over the next period. I don't think in this forum tonight I probably need to spend too much time talking about the why. I suspect if you've come out tonight, you understand and are passionate about what we are doing as a country and why we need to do so much more. The next 7 years are the key. Some people say it's too late to hold the world to 1.5 degrees of warming. That might be true. I hope it's not. I know it's not time to give up on it. And I know that every single small degree of warming over 1.5 makes a huge difference to the health of our people and the health of our planet. Every small percentage or a percentile of an nth of a degree over 1.5 will make a big difference to our country and to our people. And while I'm not going to dwell on why, I'm going to just remind ourselves of one of the reasons why this is so important. We all remember 2019-20, the Black Summer, the war and the impact it had, the lives that were lost, the nature that was destroyed, the animals that were destroyed. If we don't hold the world as close as possible to 1.5 degrees of warming, those conditions, those climatic conditions which led to that massive catastrophe, will be the average year by the 2040s. And will be regarded as a good year by the 2060s. We can't do that to our country. We can't leave that legacy for future generations to deal with. That's not an acceptable approach for our country, for our government, for any of us to take. So we absolutely have to continue on this journey and to continue fast. And I said the next 7 years are important. Every tonne of emissions, every year is important. The next 7 years, the science tells us what's key. Because if we leave it beyond 2030, we're just going to have to work so much harder. We have to invent new technologies to go and get carbon out of the air and capture it and store it, etc. Which might be necessary anyway. But the more we can minimise that, the better we'll be leaving the planet, the country, and the future generations to deal with it. Now, some people say, well, okay, that's all very well, Chris, but you're not doing enough. Next step, you've got to be doing more. I understand that. I'm sure we'll have some discussions about this tonight, but I'm going to just share this thought with you. 2030 might seem a long way away. As of next week, it'll be 80 months away. 80 months. They fly by just like that. We have 80 months to reduce our emissions by 43%. That's our target. We have 80 months to lift our renewable energy in Australia from 30% of our energy grid to 82% of our energy grid. That is a huge task. Hugely ambitious to do that in 80 months. I believe we'll do it. But I'm not here to tell you it's going to be easy. It's not. It's going to be really hard. So we have to get on with it. 80 months, 7 years. Our daughter started university this year. We dropped her off at kindergarten last week. She has no business going to university, but my point is, those 12 years of her school went like that. All that little fast on a life and I. Next 7 years are going to have to fly by for our country, for our planet. So, what are we doing? Well, I'm not going to spend the whole time talking about everything we've done since last May, because there's quite a lot. But what we've got to do is set the framework, deal with it sector by sector, and get our emissions down. So we start with the framework. Kate mentioned we passed the Climate Change Act last year. We already had notified the United Nations Framework on Climate Convention about our new target. We've already done that. But we took the view, Prime Minister, the Cabinet and I, that we should try and make it the law of the land. It wasn't necessary. You don't have to do that. Most countries in the world don't. Most countries will just have their targets. They don't actually make it the law of the land. I knew it would be hard to do, to go through the Senate. But I thought it was important because it sends the message primarily to investors in renewable energy around the world. Australia has changed. Because we had sent some pretty awful messages to renewable energy investors over the last decade. Australia's changed. The government's changed, the parliament's changed, the country's changed. They have a stable framework for investment in renewable energy. That's why passing the Climate Change Act was really important, locking in those 43% targets and net zero targets in the law of the land. Not many countries have done that. We now have. When I meet with the chief executives of renewable energy companies around the world, they tell me, your act has made a big difference to our investment decisions. And we are going to see more and more renewable energy investment. And that's really important. That's the first sector I'm going to talk about, electricity. A lot of people think it's the most important sector, and at the moment it is. It's just one of many sectors we need to get emissions down in. It's our largest emitting sector as we speak today. And it's about renewable energy, but it's about so much more than renewable energy. I already mentioned our target, 82% renewables by 2030. We're currently around 30%. We need to get it up to 82% by 2030 and then build from there. That means a lot more renewables, but it means so much more than that. It means firstly more transmission. There's no transition without transmission. It's not the sexiest thing in the world. People don't get too excited about transmission lines. I've got to tell you, it's really important. Because one thing about coal and gas is that they're together. They're all in one place. I've today come to you from the Liddell Power Station in the Hunter Valley. I was there this morning thanking the workers. It's closing this week. It's operated for 50 years. 52 years actually. And I want to thank all the workers past and present because they have powered Australia and kept our lights on for half a century. And they deserve our respect and thanks. But my point is, there I was on the Liddell Power Station. I literally could see Bayswater Power Station literally next door. And just down the road is Aurora. They're all in one place. They're around the Latrobe Valley, the Hunter Valley, Gladstone in Queensland, Collie in Western Australia, been to them all. I can tell you they're all pumped. Renewable energy is very different, so all our roofs. There are wind farms spread right across Australia. There's solar farms right across Australia. There's going to be wind farms off our coast as well. So we need a lot more transmission to move it around. It's also important for reliability. People say, oh, the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. Well, congratulations for working that out. But it's normally shining or blowing somewhere in Australia. We have the longest energy grid in the world. The largest grid. It runs from Tasmania to North Queensland to Adelaide. What we call the national energy market. That is the largest energy grid in the world. It needs to be longer and larger. So we're doing that through our own nation. It's our $20 billion fund. I've signed agreements with the governments of Victoria, New South Wales and Tasmania, and there's more to come. Again, it's not very sexy, but it's so important. I'll just give you one example. The Mariners link we've funded through Rewiring the Nation. That's the link between Tasmania and the mainland. Why is that important for reducing emissions? Tasmania is already 100% renewables. They can be 200% renewables. They really can be. But there's no point being 200% renewables if they can't send it anything. They can send it to the mainland through the Mariners link. That's really important. And then there's so much more we're doing in electricity as well. We've got a capacity investment mechanism. We've made emissions reduction for the first time an objective of our national energy system. That's really important. It doesn't sound very sexy. It's really important because those objectives determine how our regulators, AEMO and the Australian Energy Regulator, do their job. They have to comply with objectives. It's a law. Up until a little while ago, there was no requirement on them to consider emissions reduction. And they couldn't do so legally or lawfully. We fixed all of that. So that's electricity. A lot more to do, particularly around storage as well. Again, we know what to do with renewable energy, but we need a lot more storage. Again, because the one thing about renewable energy is that it's not constant. So we need to store so much of it. We need to assume, even though it will very rarely happen, we need to assume for prudent planning as we move to 82% renewables that there are long periods without wind and sun because it's our job to keep the lights on. So we need to assume that happens. So we need to build a lot more storage. Batteries are important. Household batteries. Community batteries. We're going to build one here in Jagajaga. And grid-scale batteries, which including with what they're going to put on the Liddell Power Station where I was earlier today in Newcastle. That's all important, but batteries aren't going to do the job alone. There's no battery in the world that can keep us going through 10 days. We need pumped hydro, we need green hydrogen, we need all the above. We're going to be doing that. So that's electricity. The second sector I'm going to mention is industry. Now this has consumed more hours of my life over the last 3 months than anything else. Passing our safeguard reforms through the Parliament. I'm not going to bore you with the full details. But we are not going to get emissions down in Australia unless we get them down from our 215 biggest emitters, industrial emitters. And that's what the safeguard reforms do. provides a framework, again, not for anything I'll do in terms of investment, for what the world will do in investment in Australia, what the boards have to do. And it means the chief executives can now go to their boards in Australia and every capital city around the world, wherever their board is, international board is based, and say, the government's requiring us to reduce emissions by 5% a year. And if we don't do it outside, we're just going to have to spend more and more money on offsets. So it's going to get cheaper to invest in the technology to reduce emissions outside. So that was really important to do in terms of our industry. Again, I can talk to you all night about the details, I'm not going to. But industry is the second sector that we need to deal with. And the third is transport. Transport is currently not our biggest emitting sector, but because we're getting emissions down in electricity, and because we're getting emissions down in industry, it will be our biggest emitting sector by 2030 unless we act. So we're acting. Last week, Catherine King and I, the Transport Minister and I, released our National Electric Vehicle Strategy. There's a lot in it. I also made some announcements about charging. We're going to build a charger once every 150 kilometres on our national highway network to give people the comfort they need, that they'll be charging if they drive. I have people saying to me, but what if I want to drive from Perth to Sydney? I say, well, when was the last time you did that? And they say, well, never. But one day I'm going to, and I get that, and that's fair enough. With our policy, you'll know, if you drive from Perth to Sydney or Melbourne to Townsville, there'll be a charger once every 150 k's, which is more than enough to charge. And that's just part of the charging infrastructure. We're working on a whole lot more, and the private sector increasingly is going to provide charging infrastructure as well. But that's just a little bit of the battle. There's a huge hunger now in Australia for electric and hydrogen cars, but you can't get them. If you look at the website, you'll wait 12 or 18 months. And that puts a lot of people off. Some people order it and wait 12 months. Some people, 12 months, 18 months, buy a petrol car, I suppose. It's a big problem. There's a reason why you wait 12 to 18 months in Australia. Because we don't require manufacturers to send us good cars. There's a thing called fuel efficiency standards. Australia and Russia are the only two developed countries in the world without them. So every other country requires manufacturers to send them fuel-efficient cars. And the other thing that means is that we don't have affordable EVs in Australia. Some, again, our political opponents say, oh, you're out of touch, because EVs are very expensive. Yes, they are, because your policy makes them expensive. Because we don't require affordable electric vehicles to be sent to Australia. There are dozens of affordable electric vehicles available in the United Kingdom. Dozens of them. Hardly any in Australia. Yes, it is out of reach for many Australians at the moment because of policy failure. So, we've announced we will have fuel efficiency standards. We've got a lot of design work to do. We'll work on that over the next few months. We've got 6 weeks consultation because it's a big piece of reform, but it is well overdue. Australia is way at the back of the pack. I'm pleased with what we've done in our first 11 months. We passed our electric vehicle tax cut. That has meant that electric vehicle sales, which were 2% when we came to office, are now 7%. That's good for 11 months. I'll take that. That's a pretty big jump. It's nowhere near enough. And again, because so many Australians want electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles, it's about facilitating that choice. And then, when we do that, in a couple of years, we'll get a second-hand electric vehicle market. We're converting our Commonwealth fleet to electric. We sell our Commonwealth cars after 3 years. Just turn them over. Get rid of them. Sell them. In 3 years' time, you've got second-hand Commonwealth cars available to people. And as you know, so many people buy their first car as second-hand. At the moment, it's basically impossible to get one. So there are the 3 sectors that I thought I'd just start us off on tonight. I could talk about a whole lot more. I could talk about a whole lot of what we're doing in those sectors. I could talk about a whole lot of other sectors as well. But I just wanted to give you a flavour of that approach. Set the framework and then deal sector by sector. And again, a lot of it's really hard stuff. It was not easy to get these safeguard reforms through the Parliament. It's not easy negotiating with all my state and territory colleagues on regular information. Not easy to say we want fuel efficiency standards. The Liberals tried it once. They announced it at 8 o'clock in the morning with dead by 11 o'clock that morning. They dropped it. It was controversial. We announced it last week and we got even. That's what it's about. And getting on with the job. And then, as we make these reforms and these strides, then we've got more to do. Only 2% renewable by 2030, that's big, that's hard. It's necessary. But then we have huge potential afterwards. 82% can just be the beginning. We can become, you've heard us say it, you've heard the terms, and it's true, a renewable energy superpower, an export powerhouse, the Saudi Arabia of electricity, Asia's energy factory. You choose it. You choose your term, it works. We can. We have more sunlight hits our country than any other country in the world. We have above average wind, not the best wind in the world, but above average. You put them together, they're the best renewable energy resource available in the world. We are the world's largest island, and we have no offshore wind. That is 7 levels of crazy. We've made it legal. I've declared Gippsland as the first zone. Hunter Valley is well on way, and then I've got further zones to declare after that. And it gets very windy off our shore, and it gets windy at night, which is exactly where we need it. These are the sorts of things that our country hasn't done for the last 10 years, and we're now doing. Yes, we've got a lot of catching up to do. Absolutely. We are starting way behind the pack. The best time to start this process was about 25 years ago. The second best time was last May. Getting on with it, a lot to do, a lot of communities to bring with us, as I said. I spent a lot of time in these communities. I was in Hunter Valley today, I was in Collie last week, going to coal-fired power stations, which will close, and talking to the workers, because they deserve that respect and that engagement. They deserve somebody being honest with them about the future, and our country deserves so much better when it comes to climate change. That's what we're seeking to deliver. That's what we will deliver, because that's what we owe future generations, and that's what we owe the beautiful part of the world which we have been privileged to inhabit. Really looking forward to a chat. Thank you, Kate.
As we move to questions, I do want to pick up on one of the points that Chris was making there, that we're not doing this work alone, particularly here in Victoria. We are working with the Andrews Labor government, and I want to acknowledge Vicky Ward, State Member for Eltham, who's here, and I think again that demonstrates to you how important this is at a state and federal level, and we're all working together to get on with this as quickly as possible. Now, we do want to have people ask questions on microphones, so you can see David here and you can see Simone here. Please, if you want to ask questions, move forward now and line yourselves up, and then we'll start from there.
Lining up.
Okay, we'll go to Mike. Alright, before you ask a question, if you can just give Chris your name, and as much as possible, please do keep your questions as tight as possible. You can see how many people are keen to ask. I know you've all got a lot of burning issues, but please try and keep it short to let other people have a go as well. Simone, we'll start over this side.
Chris, thank you for your words so far. They were the best words I've heard for a long time. But my questions are really around offsets. Your policies depend very heavily on offsets for now up to 2050. There's just 3 quick points about offsets. If I promise to grow a tree, and sell it as offsets, do I therefore promise to grow that tree forever? Or am I going to cut it down in 10 years' time and release all the CO2? If I say I won't cut down a tree and sell it as offsets, how long do I not have to cut it down for? And thirdly, if the country says, I'm going to reduce our emissions by 50%, and they succeed in doing that, can they then say, oh, well, I'll only go to 40% and sell the other 10% as offsets? What is there to stop people just not reducing their emissions and selling it all as offsets?
Okay, sure. Fair question. There's a lot I can say, but I'll answer it fairly quickly because a lot to get through. Yes, offsets are part of it, absolutely. They're the net zero. We all talk about net zero. We don't talk about absolute zero because offsets mean net. And we actually have the most regulated, developed offset market in the world. That's not a bad thing. But I wanted it better. And so I was concerned and I appointed a former chief scientist, Professor Ian Chubb, supported by the Honourable Dr. Annabelle Bennett, ACKC, Dr. Stephen Hatfield-Dodds, who's one of Australia's best agricultural economists, and Ariadne Gorring, to review it, to make sure that the system is fit for purpose. Because I'm not interested in nonsense offsets. I want offsets which are real and which are verifiable. And they came up and said, look, the system's by and large not bad. Here are some key improvements, which we're making. We've accepted all recommendations. Again, I can talk to you about them all. I won't bore you with them, but we've accepted every single recommendation. The answer to your basic questions is no, you can't say, I'm going to not chop this down to 30 and chop it down in 10 years' time. It's permanency. There's audits regularly. One of the panel's recommendations was that we improve and increase the auditing at arm's length from one of the key methods, they're called methods, which is human-induced regeneration, which is the one you're talking about. There's drone work, there's site visits, there's regular audits. Absolutely, what you're talking about can't be done. And if it is being done, am I here to say that every single offset has been done according to the rules? No. If they haven't, they'll be caught. And they'll be dealt with. And one of the recommendations which we've accepted is that carbon offset providers have to be, for the first time, regulated and accredited, which is a big step forward as well. So we're making all those reforms. And yeah, to your point, offsets are part of our safeguard policy. Again, it's what I was talking about before. There are industries who I want to decarbonise, like cement, steel and aluminium, for which it's hard right now. Cement, there's more cement in a wind farm than there is steel or aluminium. Those buggers have to be kept in the ground pretty carefully with a lot of cement. We need that happening in Australia. It's hard to decarbonise. But what I want is for the boards of the cement companies to be looking at it and saying, geez, look at all this money we're having to spend on offsets. We really need to invest in this new technology as it becomes available. That's the key. That's the framework. That's what we're achieving. To provide the necessary incentive for investment in on-site abatement. And offsets is just one of the roads to get there.
Thanks, Chris. Over this side.
Hi, David Mackay, and thanks for caring about this so much more than your predecessors.
That's a low bar, but I take the compliment. Thank you.
Australia is the world's third largest fossil fuel exporter, apparently. Does the Albanese government have specific targets for reducing our exported carbon and methane, like at 43% by 2030 and 0 by 2050, which I assume is the domestic output? So do you have targets, percentages for years, etc., for reducing our exports? Because if we're worried about more fire and floods, just curbing our emissions locally isn't enough. So do you have specific targets, and if so, what are they?
You're fundamentally correct in the question you put. No, we don't have specific targets. What we do have is a plan to help communities adjust to what is an inevitable transition, like the communities I was in today, which have been very coal-focused for, almost 200 years, not quite. Because 80% of our trading partners are committed to net zero. 80% of them. Right? So that means change is coming for our exports. We can pretend, as our predecessors did, that it's not happening. Or we can say to communities like Hunter Valley, like Montrose, listen, the world is less and less going to want our coal and gas. They more and more want our energy. It's renewable energy. So why don't we work with you to invest more renewable energy here in these regions where you've got the room, you've got the people, you've got the skills to export that. So I put it with respect to as a more positive. Rather than a target to reduce exports, I have a target to increase renewable energy exports from the same regions. That is the key. The world market is changing. And we just have to be honest with communities about that. I can have all the targets I like in the world. They wouldn't mean anything. When Tokyo and Seoul and Germany decide they want to change what they buy from us, that's what will drive behaviour, that's what's happening. I was in Germany earlier this year. I'll tell you what I was doing. I was selling Australian green hydrogen. And I didn't have a hard job.
Would you consider putting a time limit on the contracts that people take?
No, we can't do that. We'd have constitutional problems doing that even if we tried.
So they can still make contracts for 50 years?
Yes, that will be, there won't be people wanting to do that. There just won't be. I tell you what people are wanting to talk to us about is buying our renewable energy through green hydrogen, through submarine cables, through all the rest. That's what countries are talking to us about now.
Okay, over this side.
Thank you, Chris. Last week, Andrew Bolt in the Herald Sun had an absurd article saying that climate change is not serious. The Australian told us that the Bureau of Meteorology has got it all wrong. Are you going to support a royal commission into the damaging effects of the Murdoch media?
I gather I might have been mentioned in that Andrew Bolt article. I mentioned in most of them. Apparently, what was I last time? Because I don't read them, you see. I think I was the most dangerous man in Australia, Andrew Bolt, which I take as an enormous compliment. Which I'm doing something right. He calls me a global warming zealot. Look, yes, Andrew Bolt says that, and there's an element of climate change denial in the media news. I just get on with the job of correcting it, or, in Andrew Bolt's case, frankly, ignoring it. Because that's what it deserves. There are 9% of people in Australia who do not believe the climate science. They're very loud, I can tell you. They're on my Facebook feed if you look. They're very loud, and with due respect to them, no arguments are going to change their mind. Right? The science of climate change is more settled than the science of tobacco causing cancer. Right? If you're not convinced yet, with respect, I'm not going to convince you. I'm just getting on with the job.
Hi, I'm Janice. I'm not talking about anything sexy here, but it's about waste. Anything about organic, landfill avoidance, and alternative. I just want to know what do I need to do, or how can I do it to present a commercial plan. It's about renew our energy through waste. It's about sequestering the carbon through waste. So I'm from Eltham, so we are very good with recycling here. So we're going to build an electricity hub in Jakarta, amazing. I'm about us collectively here, recycling our waste, organic, turn it into bioproducts, and then subsequently, we actually self-sustain. We don't need electricity and power from anywhere.
Yep.
And we sequester carbon at the same time. What
So-
do I need to do?
So waste to energy's got a role to play. I was in a waste to energy facility the other day in Western Australia. They're taking all the waste of the community in Collie and converting it into energy. I'm not a fan of incineration of waste to energy. No, what I'm saying is there are waste to energy incinerator proposals out there. I'm not a fan of those because I don't believe they're good for the environment. But waste to energy, other forms are fine. That project in Western Australia was supported by ARENA, our renewable energy funding organisation. If you've got a proposal, I'm sure you can develop it and put it into ARENA, and if it stacks up, it will receive the same consideration as the other waste to energy proposals that ARENA has received, and some of which have been paid.
Minister Jeff Waters, and I'll disclose I'm from Friends of the Earth. There is a $60 to $80 billion hole in our forward estimates, because that's the cost of removing the hundreds of oil rigs and platforms and pipelines that need to be removed in the coming decade. At the moment, the industry wants to dump all of that steel into the sea, and that's 14 Sydney Harbour bridges worth of steel. Of course, $60 to $80 billion is going to be missing from our income because it'll be foregone taxation because the industry will claim the clean-up bill as costs. World's best practice is for these rigs to be completely recycled. And all of that steel, the industry has not calculated how much that steel is worth, nor the carbon footprint of not recycling it and not having that recycled steel enter into the market. At the moment, there's a temporary levy on all of the gas and oil industry for the Northern Endeavour of 48 cents a barrel equivalent. Will the government consider extending that levy so as to pay for recycling centres in WA and Victoria and possibly the Northern Territory to recycle all of that steel?
Okay. It's not my portfolio, so I'm not going to answer a question that I don't entirely know the answer to. So I'm responsible for what's up there, not what's out there in decommissioning. That would be Madeline King's portfolio. But I hear what you're saying. I'd be surprised if they don't want to recycle the steel. Again, I don't want to dwell on it, but it's on my mind because I was there today. I was at the Liddell power plant today, which is closing down on Friday. There's a lot of steel in that plant. I asked the chief executive what the plans were. His eyes lit up. He got very excited. He said, we're recycling everything, melting it down and recycling it. I said, that's good. He said, it's good for the bottom line because I'm going to pay for the demolition with the recycling, which is fine with me. I don't mind what his reasons are. This is going to be put to good purpose. I'd be surprised if there is a similar equation which goes with everything else, but I'm sure Kate and I can raise your issue with Madeline King, and I was going to tell you about the temporary levy on the Endeavour, but you were across the details, so I can't tell you that, because you already know about it. But in terms of what will be made permanent, that's something we'll need to take away and pass on to the relevant next.
Marcus Wigan. I have 2 points. One's a very simple one. You currently subsidise the remaining refineries and we produce lousy fuel. If we raise the standards for that, that gets an impact nationwide very quickly and also allows some Euro 6 cars to run. That's a simple, straightforward point, and it means it hasn't been followed through since you control the whole thing. Now, the real question is on vehicle to grid. The current developments.
I can hear him. I'll repeat the question. I'll tell you what it
Current
was.
developments are not mentioning vehicle to grid, yet there are experiments going on, I know one's in Canberra, but we're not actually pressing to get those types of cars in, which would go a long way towards helping both the storage and the transport.
Yep.
And we haven't got a large penetration of EVs. And when you explain B2G to anybody, they get very keen, but we have nothing to buy.
That's not quite right, but it's close to being right. So your first question was about fuel quality standards as opposed to fuel efficiency standards. We have actually acted on that. One of the first things I did was bring forward the requirement to reduce sulphur in fuel from 2027 to 2024, so we have done that. And I have a process underway in relation to aromatics and Euro 6 of consultation. We don't quite sort of subsidise the refineries. We do have payments to ensure that they stay open, which is a bit different to a subsidy, and we assist them with the changes, investments they need to comply with our standards. But I'll have more to say about Euro 6 and aromatics, but I've already acted on sulphur. The second question was about V2G, vehicle to grid charging. It's a very good question. Some people say, okay, all these electric vehicles, isn't it just going to put too much pressure on our energy grid when everybody's charging? There's an element of that. It's going to need to be managed. We're going to need a strong grid, particularly at peak times when people tend to charge. But it's also an enormous opportunity if we get vehicle to grid charging or vehicle to home charging. So, what does that mean? Okay, you get your electric vehicle, you drive it to work, you park it in the car park, you charge it during the day, courtesy of the boss, thank you very much. Drive it home, plug it in, reverse charge your house. Now, it's a lot more complicated than that. The boss is probably not going to continue to pay when we do that, but that's the principle. And what it does, it makes electric vehicles batteries on wheels. You know, I talked before how we need more batteries than we do. Imagine if we had vehicle to grid charging. In fact, you might have heard of Snowy 2.0, which is a big renewable project, which has provided me with a few headaches, but it's a good project, it's just needed some reforms. If every car in Australia was electric and we had vehicle to grid charging That's equivalent to 3 snowy 2.0s, when you think about it. Now, at the moment, it's not possible. The Standards Australia work hasn't been done. The regulatory environment's not right. There are 2 types, as you would know, sir. There's 2 types of car chargers, type 1 and type 2. Tesla is one particular type, Mitsubishi is another type, and the others are sort of, one or the other. You can do it technically. It's available for the Mitsubishi type, but not the Tesla type. We do need to get to vehicle grid, and so I am looking at what reforms are necessary. We're working with the states. It can't be done overnight, and we don't have enough yet electric vehicles in Australia for it to make the sort of difference we want it to make. But as we're on the pathway to increasing electric vehicle take-up, absolutely. I want to get the regulatory framework in place and the Standards Australia work done so that we can have vehicle to grid, or what we call also another way of putting it is bi-directional charging. Absolutely. Absolutely, it's a big part of the future. And that work is continuing. It started under us and it's continuing. It's not going to happen overnight. No.
Hello, my name is John. And I must say, first of all, I'm really happy that you're speaking like this because it's much more pleasant listening to you than 25 years ago listening to the current administration then talking about energy and in climate change now, and it's very frustrating. But what I want to say is that today, 90% of Australia's energy comes from fossil fuels. And if you understand what that means, it means that if we totally remove all our fossil fuel sources, we have to build 9 times as much renewable energy as we have now. And I presume you have read it. The recent Net Zero Australia report that came out from the University of Queensland, Melbourne and Princeton, they used the phrase unprecedented rate and volume of change. They're saying how difficult it is. And it is going to be difficult, and you have admitted that. And I understand that. But unfortunately, even if we get zero carbon neutral today, it doesn't really help us. It doesn't solve the problem. It's necessary, but not sufficient. Because we have 500 parts per million equivalent CO2 in the air now. And the last time we had that was 30 million years ago, when we had sea levels at least 5 meters higher than they are now, and 5 degrees warmer average global temperatures. If we do nothing more than just have net zero, that's where we're going to go. And we can't go there, as you said. We can't live in Australia if it's 5 degrees above. We can't live in Sydney if the water is 5 meters higher, and the Port Phillip Bay looks rather strange. So what do? We have a really big task. Every extra ton of CO2 in the air has to be taken out by our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I'm 72 years of age, and it's not really going to affect me in my life, but there aren't many young people here. But I feel I should... Well, yes, okay. Not the really young ones will be here in 50, 60, 70 years' time doing this. And I feel that I need to make an apology to future generations for what we didn't do, because we really have messed up. There is a question at the end.
Okay.
The question at the end, there are 2 questions. First of all, the net zero report, I know that you know, so presumably you are across it. Yep. It does raise several choices at the back of that report. Are you going to initiate any kind of response to the analysis there? And the second thing is, are we going to target, for example, 350 parts per million by the year 210? Or 2100, I mean, or are we going to have any kind of absolute target for carbon in the atmosphere globally sometime in the very long future? That's very hard to do because we're focused on things like war with China and we haven't got time to talk to them.
I have, thank you, sir, thank you for your passion. I pretty much agree with what you put. I have read the report, in fact I watched it. And so I think it's a good report. It really goes to industry and the scale of the task. Which again, comes back to our safeguard reforms, which is providing the framework of that investment necessary to justify what is a very big investment. That report really showed it's possible, it'll take a long time, and it's very expensive. That's what the report showed for industry. So therefore we need to have the framework in place to do it. In relation to your second question about international targets, I just say this, I haven't really focused on the international side of the equation. I would like to think, I would argue, we brought leadership back domestically and internationally. We were pretty absent internationally. We brought Australia back. When in the last COP, I was asked to chair a negotiation. It's the first time that's happened in more than a decade. The Australian minister hasn't been called upon to lead a negotiating session, which I did with my Indian counterpart. That was sort of seen as that would have happened, frankly, under the previous administration. I was pleased last week it was announced that I've been elected as Vice Chair of the International Energy Agency, which will happen in February, which is about bringing international issue back. And, you know, I was even on the phone today with an international colleague. We've got another meeting with the International Climate Minister on Friday, who's coming to Australia to consult with us. And we are seeking to bring leadership back, but it's the last COP was hard work, I've got to tell you, really hard work. Apart from leading the negotiations through the night, we were meeting through the night in other areas which I wasn't in charge of negotiations on, just to hold what was agreed at Glasgow. Most people, I thought, naively, that when a COP hasn't agreed something and it was then locked in and then the next COP tries to improve it. No. I was working with New Zealand and Canada and Finland and the United States and others just to hold what was agreed at Glasgow. We managed to. It was really hard work. Now, I have a view, I'm a bit more optimistic than some, that the next COP will be better. In December this year, I have a view that it will be better for a whole bunch of reasons I won't bore you with. I'll tell you what will be the best COP. It'll be the one in 2026, which we hosted in Australia. I'm confident in winning that bid. We're bidding to host it at the moment, and that'll provide, in all seriousness, a real opportunity for Australia to showcase, frankly, the Pacific. I'm seeking to co-host it with our Pacific neighbour friends, because I can't think of a better way. COP is a big deal. I'm not sure many Australians just realise what a big deal it is. 60,000 delegates coming to the country that hosts the COP. I can't think of a better way of getting the Pacific's agenda on the international stage than hosting a COP.
Thanks, Mr. Bowen. Mr. Bowen, you're aware of the world, I'm just getting back to climate for a minute, the worldwide network that measures the temperatures is massive. From January 2015 to March this year, the global temperature only deviated minus 0.3 degrees below the normal. Okay? You're aware of what they call the normal?
Yeah.
The 30-year average. In fact, which is good because you're talking about 7 years. In fact, in the last 7 years, the deviation has never been below the normal. Never been above the normal. With me?
Yeah.
It's never gone above. It is flat line. Okay? So the temperature for the last 8 years is flat line, and the last 6 years, 11 months, it's been below. Right? That's a very small amount. So it's flat line. So the question is simple. Can you explain how carbon emissions during that period could have possibly influenced any climatic event, when clearly they had no impact on the temperature?
Okay, sir, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you. You can get a lot of things on the internet, sir, doesn't mean they're true. I understand and respect your point of view. I very fundamentally disagree with it. And sir, I would just point you to the IPCC report, which is written by the world's most eminent scientists. There's a 99% agreement rate on science.
Let you go, mate. Right, sit down.
Sir, sorry, coming. Guys, yeah, let's treat him with respect. He's entitled to a point of view.
It's not me, I'm the messenger.
No. This gentleman is entitled to his point of view. I fundamentally disagree with it. I fundamentally disagree with the interpretation you're putting on what you've read on the internet. And I would invite you, well, it is if it's China's funding, but I would invite you to check the IPCC report, go through it, and work on real science, not
Well, this is,
okay, so
in
much.
fact, in the last
Okay, we might move on. Thank you,
Yeah.
though. Move on
Yep.
to this side now, okay.
thank you.
Thank you.
Hi Chris, Robin Baker. I've been advocating for community batteries.
Yep.
How will the government ensure that some of the promised community batteries, and we are very grateful for the ones that you promise, will operate for the community and not just for the DNSPs? So there seems to be an issue at the moment where basically all the benefits are going to go to the DNSPs. I've been working with Village Power since I last spoke to you, and we have a really terrific battery grid in the community in it. So I'm referring people to the subscriber model, where subscribers can directly financially benefit from exporting to the battery and participate in local energy storage and production. And we really believe this is really important, that we get the community involved if we get real change in consumer behaviour.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you for your advocacy for community batteries. We're building one in Jakarta, which is important, and they're going to play a big role. Your question about DNSPs is a fair one, but the reason why we've got DNSPs, and that's the network service providers, the energy companies, for those who don't follow the jargon. The reason why they're involved is because it's a very complicated thing, actually, to put a community battery in, right? And I love passion in community groups and